Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you to Anne and to Jessica and to Marilyn and everybody who made this day possible. Good morning to all of you around the world. I'm really delighted to be here with all of you, beaming to you from the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, the original home of the Southern Arapaho peoples. And probably like you, bundled up, well, maybe not those of you from Australia, but many of us are bundled up this morning against the Arctic blasts that we're receiving from the north. When I was originally contacted by Marilyn months ago to come and address Kolot Mayim, neither of us had any idea of the life-changing events that we would be experiencing by the time January came. Nor did I ever fathom when I wrote Wounds into Wisdom, Healing Intergenerational Jewish Trauma, that it would be so very painfully relevant just 4 years, 3-4 years hence. So tragically, we are in a moment of history right now of which we have been studying and speaking. We're now living in the midst of historical traumas in the making that will last for generations to come. And today we'll discuss how we begin to come to terms with these. And I've already received questions from several of you, which are just about that. How do we live with hope? What can we do? I'm hoping to address your questions. And we'll talk about the imprints that life made upon our ancestors due to their dramatic life experiences in their day that got transmitted to us, as well as the things that we're living through and what we can do to metabolize life better so that we don't have to pass on the anxieties, the fears, that sense of hopelessness to generations to come. We want to pass on resilience and hopefulness. So without bypassing the gravity, the real gravity of what we're living through. May I suggest to all of you to have a notebook or journal on hand. You have a moment to run and get it. We didn't ask for that in advance, but if you even the back of an envelope, because I'm going to teach in an experiential way, in an interactive way, and I think you may want to write down your insights and questions and comments so that we can look at them later together. I'm also going to ask that you have a glass of water or a cup of tea. I have both in front of me. And this is because when we speak about family histories and ruptures that have occurred, we need to be able to flush our systems. And remarkably, something so simple as a glass of water, l'chaim to all of you, it helps to keep our nervous system, our central nervous system, calm and regulated, just sipping. So it's a good tool to have. Whenever I teach about ancestral legacies, I like to begin by invoking those wise and holy beings who came before us. Sam already began with the ancestors that lived on the land that is now called Victoria and British Columbia, Vancouver Island, and the Southern Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne peoples that lived here in Colorado. It's also just beautiful and important for all of us to invoke our teachers, our rabbis, our wise and loving ancestors, to be in their presence as we talk about deep things, so that their presence and their memory, their wisdom, the emanation of their souls can assist us. So I'm going to ask us all now to bring to mind relatives, wise and well souls whose shoulders we stand upon, whose presence strengthens you, whose presence blesses you. And you might close your eyes for just a moment and think who that might be. It might be a third grade teacher or a grandmother or a friend or a sibling who has gone before you into the next dimension. Please whisper their names if you know them. We call upon these ancestors for their wise assistance in our current moment, so that our kavana today, our intention today, and all of our efforts can be oriented toward more peace, shalom, more refuah, healing for ourselves and our families and our shared world. Thank you so much. Amen. Amen. Like many of you, I was born in the years after the war, World War II. I was born to parents who were deeply impacted by the Shoah. My mother was born in Breslau, Germany, narrowly escaped the Nazis in 1939 on the kinder transport to England. Her immediate family all made it out of Europe, but she left behind scores of uncles, aunts, and cousins who were all murdered in Nazi Europe. And she never spoke of them, but we felt there was something in the back room there. My father, an American kid from Brooklyn, was deployed in the US Army to a prestigious bomb detection squadron early in the war and sent to all the most devastated parts of Germany. So my mother came here, my father went there, and they met just at the crux at the beginning of the war, and got engaged. And I have, synchronistically, I came upon, it was really a godsend, a huge box of their letters, their love letters and letters as an engaged and then married couple and new parents, all through the war. My father was in Bergen-Belsen at the time of the liberation, and he saw the unseeable, and he took pictures. And after his death, we found all those pictures locked away in his metal filing cabinet at the back of his desk. And it became very apparent to myself and to my siblings that all of those images lived inside of him and lived it with a kind of power and impact that came out tacitly, came out non-verbally, came out as well as my mother's trauma that was hidden under her floorboards, locked in her metal box, so to speak, came out in their parenting, in their rigidity, in their politics, in their anger, all of the things that made them and made living with them as we grew up very quizzical, very strange. So we'll go from here now to a few slides as I tell about this. Thank you, Jessica. Go to the next slide. Because the past does not simply disappear. We all know that now. The painful histories that our ancestors endured, as well as their wisdom, warmth, resilience, all their good resources, are intertwined within us, both psychospiritually as well as physically, physiologically. We'll talk about that today. And they create the patterns of who we are and who we are becoming. I discovered from my own family and from so many others with whom I have worked as a rabbi and psychologist that even that past pain lingers, and when it remains unspoken or has been forgotten or put into a metal filing cabinet, it becomes part of us nevertheless. And in my research, people told me their untold stories and their family secrets that they harbored for years. And today I'll tell you some of these. Let's go to the next slide. The late Israeli traumatologist Dan Bar-On taught that untold stories often pass more powerfully from generation to generation than stories that can be recounted. The untold stories have more impact. They come out in, so to speak, through our pores. They come out in our behaviors. They come out in mother's milk and in father's temper. Back to me. Thanks, Jessica. So in an effort to heal my own family wounds and my own trauma legacies, I became a rabbi, I became a psychologist, I studied trauma science. And in serving many families and individuals professionally for many years, I realized that there are patterns that take shape in a family. And I could see, because I would have whole families, sometimes 4 generations come in. I would perform a marriage or a funeral, and I would see generations, and I would see the kinds of things that the family carried down through the generations that were transmissions, sometimes transmissions of strength and brilliance, but sometimes transmissions of anxiety or a sense of scarcity, a sense of I don't belong in this world, a sense of put up your dukes, defensiveness. And these aren't necessary. They're not necessary. I asked, how does this happen? How is it that this can happen? This is before a lot of the trauma science came out, which I want to share with you today. But my question was, how is it that extreme life circumstances can get, in a sense, frozen in time and lodged in the resonant field of a family? Such patterns that happen in, let's say, 100 years before can profoundly influence the lives of several generations. And like magnets, they become like magnets that attract to them ongoing patterns that translate in different faces throughout the generations. And these might be patterns of heroism, but they can also be patterns of depression, or like we said, anxiety, or they might fuel a sacred mission. Sometimes it's an activism that gets passed down. So today, let's look at these patterns. Let's look at what has been imprinted and transmitted to us. Wisdom that is from the neck and up, I think, is not so useful. It's not usable wisdom, but when we can apply it to ourselves and have some ahas, so have some insights, then it's really material that we can enrich in our lives with. A few examples. A young woman who I worked with who became a radical feminist, and she didn't know her forebears. She discovered at midlife that her grandmother and great aunt, whom she had never met, were rebels in their shtetls. They agitated for more freedom for women. They had suffered at the hands of angry fathers and abusive husbands. And she realized, oh, this fire in me to do better for women, for myself and for other women, came from somewhere. It didn't actually start with me. There was a woman who was so fearful of her husband's unfounded betrayal. She was constantly fearful and jealous of him, and it became corrosive. It almost failed their marriage, until she learned that her father and her grandfather had lived double lives. They both had had second mistresses and entire families, and all of that material came down, and there was this huge OMG, aha. She had never known that, but that was like a transmission. That fear factor was founded in generations earlier. It didn't actually have anything to do with her husband. And it was wonderful that she found that out, because that knowledge, that awareness could release her to realize that she was carrying something that was not just a craziness in her. And perhaps closer to home, I want to tell a story that requires everybody, l'chaim, a slow sip of water. This is a story of a young woman whose first memories as a very young child were of nightmares. She was awakened regularly with nightmare images that she could finally, at the age of 3 or 4, put into words and tell her very concerned mother why she woke up crying so often. She saw every night, every time, this recurrent image, and the recurrent image was of a man in an old wooden town. She told her mother he was at the train station, and every time he would be jumping from the platform to the train tracks and running down the train tracks after a train that was just departing, yelling, "Stop, stop," very full of anguish, just very, very upset, crying and screaming, running after the train. But of course, the train got smaller and smaller and farther away, and he never caught up with it. And this was when she told that story to her mother started crying and saying, "How could you know? How could you possibly know that story?" Because that's exactly what happened to my father. He came home from the black market, found his door open, and his family was gone. And the Gentile neighbors, this is in the Second World War, told him, "Hurry, hurry to the train station. They've taken all the Jews. All the Jewish families were herded there. Hurry, you'll still catch the train, hurry." And he ran to the train station and he jumps off the platform into the tracks and running after the train. And he, of course, didn't catch up, and he never saw his family again. That was his first family. He did heal enough. This man healed enough to go on to marry again and have the daughter who was the mother of this young woman. How do dreams, how could dream images be transmitted? This is part of what I share in my book, Wounds into Wisdom. I hope you'll read it. I'll just say for now that this young woman found her way into a 3G survivors, Holocaust survivor, third generation support group. And along with these other young people, these brilliant young people, shared support and could laugh and could just relax into the fact that this was true. She told me that it wasn't unusual in this group for grandchildren to dream the dreams and dream the stories of their traumatized grandparents. So this is a both strange, uncanny topic. It's also scientifically based and evidenced now in clinical studies. So let's go on to some science now. Thank you, Jessica. Let's just get all on the same page. What is trauma? It's a word that's batted about quite a bit now, and it comes from the Greek word wound. I would say that there are small t trauma and big T traumas. The word, like I said, is used so frequently now, but it really is an important word. It's the residue of any deeply distressing life experience that overwhelms our coping capacities. And right now, friends, there's so many things, just reading the newspaper every day. We're so concerned. There's so many things that feel overwhelming. So we have to regulate our nervous system. It's very, very important. Resmaa Menakem, my African-American colleague, says trauma is anything the body perceives as too much, too fast, and too soon. Now, this is for individual as well as collective trauma, these experiences that overwhelm our nervous systems. Let's go to the next slide. We know, sadly, that there are such things as the collective trauma, an event or series of events that shatters the experience of safety for a group or groups of people. This is happening throughout the Middle East, certainly to our Israeli brothers and sisters, as well as our Palestinian cousins. These events are shattering the experience of safety. And as Dr. Leah Saltzman says, collective trauma is a shared experience that alters the narrative, the self story, the story that we have about ourselves, and the psyche, which means the soul of a group or community. And we can feel into, reflect upon how true that is right now. And we'll go to the next slide, which is that individual and collective traumas are transmitted, the unhealed residue of extreme life experiences that are transferred to future generations. And Chemi Shalev, the Israeli journalist, says, I am a Jew, and there are scenes of the Holocaust that are indelibly etched in my mind, even though I was not alive at the time. We understand this. We understand this. We have a colleague, Dr. Vamek Volkan, who talks about images, and we just heard that story. The dream images can be transmitted, deposited, and there are many, many studies of 9/11 trauma, children who received those images that were playing again and again and again on the television set, who among those children were imprinted indelibly by the fear of that moment, and which children were just fine. And actually, the studies show that the parents who were very calm and emotionally regulated, even though the TV might have been going on, if they were cool, quote unquote, the children came out of it like, oh, that was a really powerful time. But the parents who were hysterical, the parents who were very emotionally dysregulated, that translated for the children. Let's go on now. I'd like to just take a pause right now and take a breath. Oh, maybe a sip of tea or water. And let's ask, what family legacies shaped by your own ancestral history have come down to you? Let's take a moment in our journals or just to reflect. What does this have to do with you? What are the intergenerational family legacies that have come down to you? Now, you may not be Jewish at all. You may have Irish ancestry. Maybe your parents were, or grandparents were affected by the Irish potato famine or by the Great Depression in the United States, or by a natural disaster in Japan, or something else. What do you know about your family legacy that may have transmitted itself down to you? And you can keep journaling and reflecting on that for just another moment. It's good to make this material more personal. So this is just between you and you. You can just write words or draw, sketch an image. Let's go on now to the relatively new field of epigenetics. Thank you. So this field, you may have heard of this, this new branch of neuroscience and trauma science. It is the study of heritable environmental stresses, which means that the traumas and the extreme life experiences that we live have a way of getting transmitted. They are inheritable. We can go through our lives with wars, deprivations, or deportations, poverty, and that can leave an imprint. It can leave evidence for future generations. The word itself means epi, above or on top of genes, those DNA strands that are carriers of hereditary information. And this is important. It's important to say that, let's go on to the next slide, that these epigenetic mechanisms they don't change our genes, the genes themselves. They activate, deactivate, emphasize, or hush the genes. In other words, they affect gene expression. And that's important because gene expression, how the genes express themselves, can be brilliantly, but if they're coated with these methylation strands, they get hushed or muffled. Okay. So that means that our ability to handle stress, or our ability to spring back after a loss, or our ability to endure life's blows without getting sick, gets affected. And this may be why some of us are immobilized by the news, why some of us were deeply psychologically affected by COVID. I had two people that came to me whose ancestors had been hidden, either fathers, mothers, aunts, were hidden away as children in World War II because they were Jewish children. They were hidden in terrible conditions, but they survived. And when the lockdown happened during the pandemic, my clients were extremely activated, whereas other people kind of liked it. It was like, oh gosh, I get to enjoy this time alone. But you can imagine that this is that these activities, that these imprints do get translated, whether or not we are conscious of what is in our ancestral history. Okay, good. We can go to the next one now. What's really, really important is to know that epigenetic changes are reversible. So if genes are made less resilient due to these stresses, they can be reversed. And that's why this material is so important, because as we'll see in a moment, what could reverse that change that happened over, that imprint that happened over generations that got transmitted to me? Actually, it's awareness. And that's what all the traumatologists around the world say. And we'll see, we'll look at this in a moment, that when we turn to face, oh, we have that aha, my grandparents went through that, and that may have been why I am so anxious in these certain situations. When we have that aha, there is this release and things start to change within us. There are landmark studies. I want to mention Dr. Rachel Yehuda, who's done profound work. She's perhaps the one of the lead epigeneticists in the world, and did a lot of research on Holocaust survivors over several generations now. One of her landmark studies, she has several, in 2015, it proved that 3 times Holocaust survivors' children, let's say that, were 3 times more likely to develop PTSD symptoms when exposed to traumatic events than Jews whose parents had not suffered in the Holocaust. It's very important to know that. And when we know this and study this material and understand what's in our own genogram, what's in our own family history, we can start to say, I get it now. and things start to release for us. Let's go on. Every family, no matter what you think of your family, no matter how neurotic you think they are or how wonderful, every family has its own ruptures and resources. And that's really important. I've had people come to me in my classes and say, there is nothing good in my family. There's nothing. I have distanced myself from my family. They were too neurotic or they were too unwell, and I have nothing to do with them, and I don't want to think about them. But my friends, every family has its traumas, its ancestral traumas, because of the nature of the world. And likewise, every family has, if you're here, that means that they survived. That means they had the smarts, the luck, the good fortune, the intelligence, the resilience, the something, fill in the blank, that got you into life, that fathered and mothered you. So let's take a moment right now, next screen, please, and think about this. What family resources can you tap? What has come down to you to assist you at this current moment of history? And that might be, oh, my family were good eaters. They loved food. It can be something funny. They loved music. They were good musicians. They were gardeners. They were smart. They had friends. They had social capital. What did your family have that can assist you right now? So just give yourself this moment to jot down, journal, or just reflect about your own legacies from your father's side, your mother's side, or any other family to whom you were grafted on. Some of us are adopted. Some of us are adoptive families. That's very important as well, because we inherit from our biological families, of course, as well as our adoptive families or foster families. Make sure you're breathing a lot and stretching if you feel a need. Make yourself comfortable. And then we'll come back. You can certainly continue writing if you're writing, and also pick up later. Okay, thank you, Jessica. So in my research for Wounds into Wisdom, I interviewed people from all over the world, Jews from all over the world, to find out who had suffered from historical traumas and of all kinds, not only World War II, but also for the Mizrahi Jews, the Farhud and the running from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and from riots in Egypt. Our people have lived through all kinds of things all over the world, terrible things. And I wanted to know who had defied the normative trauma sequelae, the normative symptoms that come out of the residues that come out of nervous system trauma, who had transcended the fear, the isolation, the agitation, the numbness, all of the things that are normal residues of trauma, and had come through in a sense transformed, had come through with more wisdom, with more compassion, with more courage on the other side, who had done the deep work and sort of threaded the needle, because it's not easy to do. And in the book, I tell about these great people, and my life was so literally changed forever by meeting them. And I want to share a few of the things. Now, there were 7 principles. Some of you have read the book, but some of you haven't. There were seven key principles or key teachings that were the common denominators, the how-tos. What should I do if I am the recipient of historical traumas? What can I do if I have lived through these traumas to transform myself so that I don't get totally stuck, totally numb in these postures that trauma leaves me, and of always being defensive, or always being a lone wolf, or always feeling ashamed or isolated. All of these typical sequelae of trauma. So I hope you'll read these incredible stories in Wounds into Wisdom. But here are 4 keys to trauma healing. These are, I call them cultural healing, trauma healing in the book, but they're collective trauma healing, but they go for personal, individual trauma healing as well. And the first one that I'll share is what we already touched on: be aware. Yeah, you can go on. Thank you. Be aware of your family legacies. One of the great collective trauma specialists, Dr. Yael Danieli, also from Israel, says awareness of transmitted intergenerational trauma processes will inhibit transmission of pathology to succeeding generations. Take a moment with that and really rock what she is saying. Awareness and key, that's the key word, awareness. When we are aware of what has landed in us, the infidelity, the stories, the pain, the deprivation, whatever it is, when we're aware, it comes to the front brain, our prefrontal cortex, we are able to release the trauma legacies because we get them at a different level, and our nervous system can start to unpack and let go of the sequelae of these traumas. So first, and maybe the most important thing, if you remember nothing from my lecture, when you leave, just awareness, be aware of what landed in you. Next slide. Okay. Face your losses. This is really, really important. Not to turn away, not to blame, not to be victim, just face them straight on. This is from Katya, a wonderful woman I worked with from Sderot. She said, our roads were are full of deep potholes. You learn to drive around them. But facing the situation is another thing altogether. That means facing your grief, the grief of the situation, of losing someone, the grief of the situation of what's happened on October 7th, the grief of the situation of what we must do now to make it different. All of this is very, very important. And so when we face our grief, we can start to feel our grief. When we don't feel our grief, when we don't shake with grief and cry and sweat with the grief, it lands inside of us. It becomes pathogenic. It makes disease on the inside of us. This is really, really important. I can't say it more strongly that we have to feel the grief of this era that we're living in, with the climate crises, with the the bloodshed, the needless suffering, and take out that word needless, the suffering on all sides. Yeah, otherwise we turn numb. Otherwise we just become, it goes inside of us and it changes us from the inside. And so one way is to drive around these potholes, and another way is to face into what happened to that town, what happened to that home, what happened to our lives. And this takes time, and it takes tremendous commitment and patience just to feel the grief. So Katya is somebody that I learned a lot from. And the next slide shows a piece of incredible Torah from a man named Rami Elchanan. Some of you may know him. He's become rather famous. He's an Israeli as well. And he said, we have an enormous ally on our side, and that's the power of pain. He lost his 14-year-old daughter to a suicide bomber years ago in Jerusalem. And he said, it's very much like nuclear energy. You can use your pain to bring darkness and destruction and more pain, or to bring light and warmth and hope. And he is somebody who knows. And I write about him in my book because he confessedly became like a madman after he lost his daughter. He was angry and rageful, and he became, he said, like a monster. And that lasted for about a year. Whoops, let's go back. Until something remarkable and powerful happened to him, which I won't tell you what it was, that turned the key, so to speak, and he became an advocate for peace and a moral leader in Israel. He's very famous now in Israel because of what he went through. His entire life took on a new meaning. So here is this idea that if we have pain, we have to feel the pain, but then we can harness the power of our pain to bring light and warmth and hope. Okay, now let's go to the next one. Thank you. All of the people that I interviewed, these incredible people, said you have to take meaningful action. Take action. Do something. There was somebody who's I worked with who's someone very, very close to them committed suicide. And it was, of course, a completely devastating experience, devastating. It was a child. And years later, she experienced, it was like it came to her synchronistically that people who were enduring the pain of suicides of loved ones were coming to her. It was like they were in her path, and she had the know-how, she had the skill to bring to bear like nobody else could, because if you haven't been through such a terrible thing, it's hard to speak to it. So our pain makes us capable of going places that other people cannot go, speaking to people that other people cannot reach. And so we can take meaningful action based on pain, because based on the heartbreak that we have to endure. And the Midrash Socher Tov says, had I not fallen, I could not have arisen. Had I not sat in the darkness, I could not have beheld the light. And that is the teaching of taking action. That's one of the four principles that of the seven that I've shared with you. So I think we have one more slide. Yeah, there's a quote from Wounds into Wisdom. We're created with a capacity to heal from wreckage, transform fear into compassion, and turn tragedy into strength. And that is what I learned, and that's what I'm passing on to you. And that we have a mandate to draw on our ancestors' greatest traits, their survival skills, their courage, their faith, their ingenuity to apply to circumstances. Now, there are so many people that are suffering right now. What can we do from our own pain, not from our own do-goodness, just being Pollyannas, but no, feeling the grief, harnessing the power of our pain, and going places that we could have not gone before we endured what we have endured. So let's do one more. We'll go to the next slide and park on that slide. And I love this. This is actually a photograph of a place in Northern California that was sent to me, and it felt like the wise and well ancestors. I wonder if, since we have a few more minutes, if you would join me right now to sit back. We'll park here and just take a sip of water first. I'm going to, again, cheers. And take a breath, and let's sit back for a moment and just breathe into all that. I know that was a lot of information and a lot of, in a sense, evocative material. It evokes things within us, and it should. Things that we could use living into right now because we're feeling current events so strongly. I hope that you will jot down, or you have jot down some questions and comments. But right now, I'd love for you to just close your eyes and sit back into your seat. You could also do this lying down. And just for a few moments, let's regulate. We call it co-regulating our nervous systems together. That means just relaxing together. We've been on a little journey together, and now we get to just relax and remember that there are dimensions that are unseen dimensions. There are places that are unseen by science, by our normative world, that in our tradition, in the Jewish tradition, and in many religious and spiritual traditions, there are worlds within worlds. And many of those unseen worlds have help for us and blessings for us and strength for us that we can tap. And as our bodies relax right now, I'll just say that one of those worlds is the ancestral dimension. We call it in Kabbalistic terminology, Olam Ha'avot, the world of the ancestors. And I would love for you to see now in your mind's eye, standing before a door, standing before a gate or a portal leading into that other dimension, and simply notice the door today may be different than any other day. And know that there are beings on the other side of this door who are in need of help, but there are also beings on the other side of this door who are full of help for us, for you. And if you would like, you can just stay right here and imagine into that. But if you would like, you can knock on the door to let them know you're coming. And enter by pushing the door open. Taking 3 steps forward across the threshold. Allowing the door to close in back of you and seeing before you two long hallways, columns of your bloodlines, your souls, your relatives, one long hallway of your maternal bloodline, and one long hallway of your paternal bloodline. And if you're adopted, or if you were fostered, you may have other hallways of souls. Now, right now, I don't want you to do anything but just stand there and feel that there are beings here who would love to accompany you in this lifetime, to give you guidance, to bless you, to be guardians, to help assist you. And would you just put out an invitation for any well and wise and loving soul to come stand by you now? And this could be from your bloodlines, but it could also be, like we said earlier, teachers or friends who have gone before you. Who wants to come? Now you can trust your imagination. You can trust that felt sense more than imagination, that there is, yes, I remember you. I know you. I feel you. If someone steps forward. And don't worry if nobody is coming. You can just take this time to put out the invitation and trust. But remember that there's also historical figures who you may emulate, with whom you feel a kinship. Breathing and relaxing. See who wants to come and allow yourself to be surprised. And if somebody does come, would you just pose a question their way? A question or a situation. How might I feel? What might I do in this situation? Ask them. And then be receptive and just quietly listen. Breathing. Calmly. Receiving any felt sense, feeling sense, or image. Trust whatever comes. Allow yourself to be surprised. And then when you're ready, with a gesture of thanks, a gesture of honor, like a bow or a namaste or a hand on the heart, allow whoever came to you to recede back into their own abode as you begin to cross with 3 steps backwards across the threshold of that door. Closing it firmly in front of you. Feeling completely embodied. Wiggling your toes, stretching your fingers. Rubbing your hands together to create some warmth. And when you're ready, place the warmth on your face or your heart or your belly, wherever feels good. And then we will come back together. Take a moment first to jot anything down in your that came or didn't come. Again, some people don't get anything, receive anything or anyone the first times they do this. So please don't worry. Just enjoy the relaxation. Yeah, we'll take a moment to jot some things down in our journals and come back together. And I believe now we have a few moments for some questions and comments, and I will let my wonderful hosts take over.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Firestone, for providing so much hope and light to this complex topic at this challenging time. We have no shortage of questions for you. So if I may begin, we have one that just came in. How can we amplify the healing for ourselves and others? And the questioner goes on, I guess our own well-being will help if we are emotionally regulated. Then she asks, therapy, prayer, and living well. How can we develop awareness and share that with those around us who are stuck?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's the question that we're all asking. What can we do? I think this questioner is already has many of the answers right there. And this is a sophisticated questioner because they know that by regulating our own selves, we are doing already so much. It doesn't mean to be oblivious at all. It doesn't mean to turn away from the gravity of this moment that we're living in. I just got a bing on my phone that it's 100 days of captivity today. That the hostages, the remaining hostages, are still in captivity. How do we live with that? That's just a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing to think of all the suffering in Gaza right now, the suffering in Ukraine. So living in a sense, dual consciousness, feeling the gravity at the same time, to be the most helpful to ourselves and others so that we can really be of assistance. Our nervous systems need to be regulated. And that means that we aren't compulsively acting. We're not frenetic or frantic. We're not living from a place of fear, that we maximize our spiritual practices, which whatever that is for you, which might be swimming or Tai Chi or meditation, definitely prayer, so that we're aligning with what I call that which is greater than us. We're aligning with the powers that are coming through us, that are trying to be of assistance to us right now. And that is our ancestral helpers. People on the other side are great rabbis, our great leaders, our loving relatives who are wanting to hold us and wanting to help us get through these things that we're living through. So however you do it, and for everyone who's listening to this right now, you have your own way. And it might be that you're a walker, or that you love animals, that you love nature, that you go into nature and can commune in that way. However you can log on, so to speak, to the source of compassion, to the source of deep knowing, deep faith. That's how you, to that which is bigger, that's that which is greater. I call it twig, that which is greater than us. That's how we can do that. And by regulating ourselves and feeling that we are held by bigger forces, loving forces, wise forces, we are automatically and non-verbally creating a field, a resonant field that others can also relax and have faith and know that there is something bigger. That is, and also, as we said earlier, taking action in meaningful ways, whether that's talking to people, whether it's becoming an activist, whether it's writing letters, whether it's sending packages, whatever, or giving money, whatever is your way. So it translates through the different levels, but first we have to be regulated. You're right. Thank you for that great question.
Okay, and just a reminder, if anyone does have a question, to put it in the Q&A and we'll try and get to it. I don't think we're going to be able to get to every question. Many of the questions we did receive do concern current events, and
Sure.
I would like to ask on behalf of those questioners, how do you have hope for the future of the world? And many of those questions, of course, relate to the conflict in the Middle East. And how do you experience the current conflict, and what gives you hope regarding that?
It's hard right now because we can see that these events that are unfolding are really have roots in past generations, right? They're the outcome of unresolved conflicts that have stemmed from centuries ago, and political as well as mythical, we could say, situations where we haven't worked well together, we haven't resolved the wounds or healed the wounds that are in the past. And some of us might even say they go back to biblical times. What we do know is that we have tools now. So whereas we may have felt that we are victims of the situation, it's important to realize that, wait a minute, we're actually not, October 7th may have been a horrendous, unwarranted, ungodly attack of brutality and barbarism. But this is not 1933, and it's not 1945, and we're in a completely different position now. Our trauma residue may want to tell us this has happened before, it will always happen, this is doomed, we're doomed to live this out forever. And we have to stop ourselves from that kind of thinking. That's our trauma talking. It's not, actually. We have enormous power. And when we go into that kind of thinking, then we are rendered powerless to resolve the situation with smarts, with wisdom, with know-how, using our social and moral capital. So it's very important to be able to distinguish between what is that's my trauma talking, or that is actually my prefrontal cortex, my thinking brain, my executive function that's thinking things through and being smart about this. That's the first thing I would say. This is a situation that resonates as if it has always happened and will always continue to happen. And I can make that more graphic, but I think you can read between the lines of what I'm saying. So it's really important to, again, like we just said, when we come into our calmness, when we feel that we have resources that are coming both ancestrally to us, as well as our own smarts, as well as the actual facts on the ground, that we do have incredible resources if we want to go to break through, then that's hopeful. That's really hopeful. And we get smart about it and we start putting our heads together and creating resolutions. There's a book that can be written and will be written, many books that will be written about this time. And it's really important that we don't fall into these potholes rather, that Katya talked about, but that we can face into the grief and we can start feeling the feelings, but then going beyond it. Don't fall unnecessarily for too long into those places where we're helpless and hopeless.
We have a question regarding what you would advise someone who is experiencing complex trauma and maybe needs a retreat center.
Well, there are no shortage of retreats. Depends on how much hands-on work you would like, whether this is physical rehabilitation that you need, or psychiatric or psychological, or just a yoga center where you can get good food, wonderful food, and be kind to your body. So there's all different levels of help, of retreats that offer meditation, that offer literally, medical intervention. So it depends on what you need, and we can't go into that right now in the scope of our time here, but I think what would be good is to make up a list of the kinds of help that you need. Is it at what dimension, like medical or just relaxation? Is it some, needing to talk to someone or to be instructed in meditation? Is it someplace beautiful that you need, or do you need something that's really more like a medical facility to do an intervention, or is it addiction related, etc.? There's so many questions. Make up a list of 10 things that you feel would be on that list, and then you can go to town on the internet. Of course, you have to be discerning, and probably the best way to find out what's good for you is word of mouth, and seeking out, asking your doctor, asking your psychologist, asking your rabbi or your minister. Do you know of a place that I can go with these particular resources?
Okay, we have another question from someone who wants to reduce the impact of their trauma on their children and grandchildren. How can they go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm happy to speak into that. The 7 principles are really, and that we talked about 4 of them today, are really important, that you look at those 7 principles and know that even though our children are here, right, and our grandchildren in many cases are already here, so genetically we've already transmitted our genetics. But as we change our epigenetics through awareness and through self-work, we are passing to our children it's like a different resonant field. I can't tell you the amount of students who have asked that question, and then they later contact me and say, boy, my children didn't know anything about what I was doing in my studies or in my self-work, but they say, Mom, you're so different. Or Dad, like, wow, you didn't raise us like that, but now I can see you're changing. And that kind of modeling is enormous. So every bit of work that you do on yourself to become more aware to become more awake and alive, and that you take action in your life, that you do this work, getting yourself out of the potholes of victimhood, for instance, or blame. That is, you don't even have to say it directly to your children or grandchildren. They will pick it up. It will ripple out. So you can trust that. It's like magic.
Okay, and another question that stood out is how many generations of can trauma persist if left untreated?
Such a good question. The indigenous say 7 generations. Our Torah says 3 to 4. When it says, yea, 3 unto 4 generations, do you remember our sins? It's translated sins, but it's really our wounds. And again, I talk about that in Wounds into Wisdom, that biblical passage. The truth is, okay, 3 to 4 or maybe 7. Our clinical research since the beginning of epigenetic research is really just 3 generations. And so we know, for example, the Dutch hunger winter, the terrible winter of 1942 to 1943, when the Nazis made an embargo. And then again in the 30s, we have research from the 30s when the Russians made an embargo around Ukraine and starved millions of people. Same thing that the Nazis did in the 40s. We have studies from the women who were pregnant in those years and the children who were born in those years, in the 40s, in 1943. We knew, the scientists already knew back then, that those children would be deeply compromised physically. But what they didn't know is that spiritually and psycho-emotionally, those people and their children would also be compromised in terms of a propensity, not necessarily, but a propensity for anxiety, for depression, for psychiatric diseases. So the science has 3 and now to 4 generations of evidence-based data, and I think it's proving what we knew intuitively all along, that we are affected. We're all connected. We're very deeply connected to everybody through time, in our lineage. And so Jews of all times, for example, or indigenous of all, for many, many generations, because the peoples that have suffered discrimination are going to be impacted, both with resources, with resilience, and with smarts, as well as with maybe always looking behind you, and a sense of perhaps defensiveness, or a sense of not belonging. I don't know how it turned up in your own family. So it's hard to say exactly what science shows, what the scriptures and various traditions show, but we know that it's 3 to 4, maybe even many more.
And Rabbi, would you have time for one more question?
Sure, let's do one more.
Okay. A lot of the questions did have to do with descendants of the Holocaust, and this is one. As a descendant of Holocaust survivors, I've always had a fear someone is going to take something away from me. How can I release this old, well-worn habit?
Yeah, so there's a sense of defensiveness, a sense of self-protection, or maybe isolating oneself to defend against. We don't get too close, just a lack of trust in the world. And that's so understandable, isn't it? So the first thing is just having compassion for yourself, having compassion for the fact that was a really smart, quote unquote, smart adaptation. That was an adaptation that worked for your ancestors, right? That came down to you. It worked because it probably kept your relatives be protective, to not trust. But once you are here and once you are going, aha, oh, well, maybe that's not so necessary nowadays. Maybe I can select out, knowing that I have that trauma legacy, and looking around me and disproving it, talking to people about it, airing it, knowing that there is trust in your community, then you can start to dispel that legacy. And as you do, as you begin through insight and compassion to dispel that legacy, your progeny, the people around you, the people that come through you, your children, grandchildren, students, friends, will also be relieved of that energy. So this is really great work. I'm so glad that you're here. And probably every one of us here has their own version of that, whether you're Holocaust survivors, or whether you're Farhud survivors, or whether you're Irish or Indigenous, or wherever in the world you came from. We all have these legacies. And so it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just to be aware of. And I guess it's a moment to just wish all of us that we are in solidarity in this awareness, and we can help each other out with this new information.
Well, Rabbi Firestone, on behalf of Kolat Ma'im, I'd like to thank you for this tremendously insightful past 75, 80 minutes. And so unfortunately, we can't do a large round of applause, but I hope everyone joins me in that.
Thank you so much.
And just like to remind people that our next talk will be on February 4th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, again on Zoom, where Rabbi Mike Urim will speak on the topic of the next generation of Judaism, what we can learn from millennials, and the link will go out for that. This talk will be recorded, and we'll send out a link for that, as well as resources related to this talk. So thank you again,